we haven't lived up to our roles as men. We failed in that responsibility. Best way I can describe it is we've left our women with deep-seated feeling of malnourishment. By malnourishment, I mean we give them intimacy, we give them the physical intimacy with sex, with buying gifts, taking on dates, taking on dinners, but we don't give them that emotional connection that they long for, that they desire.
What's good, folks? My name is James Saydee Jr. Welcome to The Furnished Mind. Today we'll be discussing masculinity with an all-male panel that will include Ben Peterson, Chris Hale, Tyler Scoop, and Osman Jama. I'm just thankful for having these guys on here today just to kind of share their heart and some issues pertaining to men in our current culture. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, of course, feel free just to comment below. Also, just a heads up what we're going to be doing as well. We'll be having an all-female panel coming up next, so you guys look out for that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and dive in. So traditionally, masculinity manifested itself as a man's ability to provide and protect for his family, his ability to gain honor within society, and any attributes to promote these characteristics. This idealized definition encourages certain behaviors in men that are deemed masculine, while discouraging certain behaviors in men that are not masculine. Precarious masculinity teaches that masculinity is not intrinsically woven into man, but rather must be achieved socially, and based on violation of these social norms, it can be lost, which would allow for these that subscribe to this idea of precarious masculinity to believe and conclude that men behave aggressively in order to protect their masculine traits and status and prevent that inevitable loss. But these days, there appears to be a new label to describe maybe an age-old form or manifestation of masculinity. One which describes masculinity as tyrannical in nature, with no regard to the life or well-being of women, children, and or other men. Such toxic teachings such as you have to be tough all the time, or you're not allowed to show emotion or be vulnerable, are the usual contributors in terms of the dialogue regarding this issue. With that being said, what do you think of first when you hear the term toxic masculinity?
Masculinity. When I first hear that toxic masculinity, that seems to be the battle cry of the modern day feminist movement. Don't you guys think? Is this toxic masculinity? Masculinity itself is toxic. It's the idea that men are oppressors and women are victim of their bondage, in a sense. And it sees the patriarchal system as unequal, that men have all the leadership, men have all the power, women are to be submissive, women are to be subservient. That's kind of toxic masculinity in a nutshell, at least from the feminist movement. That's how they kind of view it.
I think of catcallers and disrespectfully noisy people. I don't know. Specifically dudes.
I would totally agree with Ben on that one. For me, I think there's two definitions. I think one for women would fall in line with Ben's view toxic masculinity. And then the other side I've heard is like suppressing emotions, masking distress, maintaining our appearance of hardness, or acting tough when you don't need to. And then movies kind of depict how men should act at like one way, and then in other movies they depict men acting a different way. So just depends on what scale of the side of it you're looking at it, from a male point of view or female point of view.
I want to kind of jump into the way that I see it, just as a phenomena in society today. So thinking this one through, it kind of harkened back to my study of history. And like, if we look back to ancient Greece, we can see that gymnastics or anything having to do with the conditioning of the body was considered to be a weight in one sort of education. And if that was out of balance, what would happen was the rest of the society would look at it to where a man who trained specifically and only in gymnastics, again, gymnastics, so to speak, he would become unruly and wild. And they tried to temper this or create a balance with the study of, again, quote unquote, music. And music it's sort of, the way that it's understood and the way it's taught is to be anything pertaining to the mind. So language, reading and writing, arithmetic, astrology, any of that stuff, or astronomy, I don't really know the difference. But so the way that I see it is that it still kind of harkens to the same situation. You know, we look at ourselves as physical beings, and when we're concerned overly with the flesh or concerns of the flesh, then we sort of neglect the emotion, the empathy, the intellect to go behind a wise understanding of something. And I think that's sort of what feeds into the idea of toxic masculinity. So I think the way that you guys just defined it was absolutely fantastic. And I think, Osman, you pointed out really, really well that there's two perspectives to look at it from, right? Men and women will look at it totally different. And I think that's absolutely on point.
Another thing that I think of is a nature versus nurture kind of thing, because a lot of people like think of it as like it's just a nurture thing. Like men are just raised to be a certain way, and society tells you that you have to be manly, or you have to like show your authority over other people or stuff like that. But not all of that can be, like, to me, that throughout history has been the case. So there's got to be a lot of nature involved in that to me too. I mean, my background's biology, so like if you look at just a purely like throughout creation, like the animal, like all animals are like the exact same thing too, right? Like little baby birds know how to do things without being taught how to do them. So I don't know what level is nature versus nurture. I think that's what a lot of, whether it's masculinity, femininity, gender arguments can be, that it's like there's got to be something in the middle for me, and people are arguing that it's either nature or it's nurture, and there's like no in between.
So with that being said, then, feminism is described as the belief in and advocacy for equal rights based on the idea of equality for the sexes. According to PewResearch.org, 19% of American women say feminism describes them very well, and 42% of women they state feminism describes them somewhat well. With that being stated, are men responsible for modern day feminism?
I wouldn't say it's totally man's fault, but we definitely contributed to its rise. We haven't lived up to our roles as men. We failed in that responsibility. Best way I can describe it is we left our women with deep-seated feeling of malnourishment. By malnourishment, I mean we give them intimacy, we give them the physical intimacy with sex, with buying gifts, taking on dates, taking on dinners, but we don't give them that emotional connection that they long for, that they desire. We tend to treat them as fragile, delicate objects, like, oh, you can't do that, I can do it for you because I'm a man and you're a woman, you're not physically able to do it. We just treat them with such a fragility that comes across as very insulting. We like to say that we understand them, but we hear what they say, but we don't listen. So there's a sense of communication between men and women that just does not happen. We hear what they say, but we don't really listen to them. And especially, and I guess this is true throughout history, but you hear about now because of media, but men have stopped being protectors of women and become predators of women. We're meant to shelter them, to protect them from harm, but yet we use them for harm. We prey on their weaknesses. We prey on their insecurities. So in a way, yes, men have contributed in a part to the rise of feminism, although I wouldn't completely shoulder the blame on us men.
This one's kind of tough for me because like I identify as a feminist, right? Like I think every single one of you guys does, because men and women deserve an equal chance at whatever they want to do, right? And so like I'm assuming by modern feminism you're like taking basically the extreme of a group instead of, I mean, I don't know anybody that's not a feminist. You know what I mean? So I don't know. This one was kind of tough for me. I think I agree with Chris in that it's definitely a both side of the coin thing. I don't think that I think society in general, no matter men or women or wherever, created a need for it, right? And then now it has certain aspects of it have gotten a little bit out of control, in my opinion.
I would agree with Ben and Chris in a lot of points. I can't pinpoint where in our society where it went from men and women are meant to be companions and it turned into a competition. And I think within that, we kind of lost frame of how we can help one another, because I think we've become, have you ever seen the Michael Jordan, and I can't remember the soccer player, female, and it was a commercial, and the premise was anything you can do, I can do better. I think that bled into all aspects of life. And I think a lot of it, so for me, feminism of what Ben's talking about is old school feminism versus today's feminism, which is anti-men. I don't agree with. I don't think that men are the byproduct of all women's problems. I think some are. And I think the culture has pressures on females in different ways than men. But I can't get on board with modern feminism today because their whole premise is anti-men in a lot of it. And I think it's hurtful. And I don't know how we can get back to being companions with one another rather than a competition, or you hurt me, now I get to hurt you kind of mentality that's going around. I don't think it's helpful for us to grow as individuals or as a society. Yeah.
Last one a little bit. I don't know that much about the whole "you hurt me, I hurt you" movement. We all have our own different experiences, and that's not been the way that I've seen it. I'm not saying that that's not right. It's just not what I've seen. So the way that I see it is, the feminist movement really started back in the 1920s, and you could say before that, but specifically with the rise of press in America, right? There's constantly this feed for news, something new. And the idea then is that what's your fulfillment? What's your purpose? And Chris, you talked about this briefly and saying like, I don't remember exactly your words, but something to the effect of you hear, you listen, but you don't hear it as a man. And I think that that's incredibly important to recognize that, hey, this is something that the Bible has called us out on thousands, 2,000 years ago almost, and we're still falling prey to the same thing. So I want to just talk briefly about like the idea of the rise of feminism. So when we talk about feminism, we talk about inequality, right? And that's the focus for the feminist movement, is that there's not been equal opportunity. Women were not given the same opportunity of jobs. They weren't compensated the same, and they were sort of looked at as, you need to fulfill a role. You'll be a homemaker, you won't be what you want to be. And that's the ultimate challenge, is that you don't get to tell women what they want to, or what they're allowed to pursue for themselves, right? So many people gather a really important part of their identity, their self-identity, from their career, their work. I identify myself largely by what I spend the majority of my time on, which is my work. But ultimately, I think that men are largely responsible for it, but not in the way that the feminist movement wants to teach. They want to teach that man has been this predator and he has taken advantage of women at every turn. And I think that you can't do that. I think it's an easy thing to do because the perpetrators of the crime of marginalizing women in general have been men. Because of the idea of the patriarchy, men have been holding this position of power for so long that when it was challenged in that women want to step into equal positions or even positions of leadership, that men, whoa, they reeled against it. And they pointed to things that allowed them to make a case for it. And there's Bible verses that would be used to sort of try to manipulate this truth and say that, you can't have a position over a man because, well, that's ungodly, or that's against my nature. And ultimately, yeah, I think men are responsible, but I think more than that, it's the news sources. News profits primarily off of controversy. And what we see when we look in the news is something, whoa, that's shock factor immediately. That's always what wants to sell papers, grab our attention, sell news. And even back in the 1920s, or rather, let's look at the 1940s, when women were trying to enter workforce, it was allowed at first because it was essential. It was needed. But when men came back from the war, suddenly these women were poo-pooed. No. You can't hold a job that a man should have instead. And that led to this feeling of disingenuity or disenchantment with the system the way that it was. That's not fair, that's not right. And it was correct. The way that I see it is that was absolutely right. The system needed to be challenged in that way. And women deserve every opportunity to pursue the job that they find self-worth in. There's nothing wrong with it, the way that I see it.
So in political and economic discourse, it is now very common to hear that there appears to be some sort of discrimination in the workplace between men and women. In fact, they state that for the same work that a man would do, a woman would get paid 80 cents on the dollar in America. So my question then would be, is there a gender pay gap? And if so, how do we as men illuminate the illegal activity that exists in these industries in order to create a more equitable outcome for women in the modern workplace?
That's always kind of driven me, like, culturally, what drives me nuts is like gender aside, drives me nuts that people don't talk about what they make. Like, I think if you just talk about what you make with your coworkers and you're like, oh, really, you make like a couple dollars an hour more than me? Like, it's all like controlling the workforce, basically. Like right now, I'm really blessed to work with my family, and everybody gets paid the same, and it's all very open and whatever. But in my previous jobs, like, I would talk about it, and people will just be like, wait, like, you're gonna tell me what you make? I'm just like, yeah, it's not a secret. It's like, I don't care. Like, I'm not rich. I'm not poor. Like, this is what I make, and we do the same job. I don't understand why we don't get paid the same, or whatever. And then just have bonuses for if you do a super good job or something like that. I don't know. I think that causes a lot more than just the gender pay gap problem. It causes like just inequalities, because obviously you're going to try to pay somebody as little as possible to do as much work as possible. I mean, if not everybody does that, right? But it's the smart business choice to do that. It's not a good human being thing to do, and I would never do that. But it's if it's a smart business choice, people will stomp on each other to make a dollar or to save a dollar in this case.
All right, so looking at it from the perspective of the employee, absolutely, you're 100% right. Hey, I deserve to be making every penny that so-and-so is making, except for when you look at productivity. And if you incentivize it by bonuses, then suddenly the employer can no longer budget for it adequately. So something like working in construction for many, many years, I don't anymore, but I did for many years. And what I always found out was that when so-and-so made more than another employee, and the other employee found out that, hey, John makes more than me, he became incredibly discontent with his work. And I think it harkens back to a biblical point in the idea that comparing yourself to what other people have fosters feelings of inequality and makes you discontent with your work. The idea of pay gap, absolutely, there's a problem with it. Even just over the past 10 years, it's been ranging from 15 to 25% difference on average for men versus for women. Men are paid 15 to 25% more over the last 10 years. And, Ben, you brought up an interesting point about the way that today, from the perspective of an employer, I want to pay as little as possible for the most amount of work that I can get. And it makes me think of this story of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. It used to be that people who worked harder were actually paid less to incentivize them to work more so that they had to reach a certain quota in order to get the same amount of pay. Now, today we see an inversion of that, and that's capitalism in its most fair sense. And I think that that's fantastic. That's the way that it should be. But you do bring up the idea that we need to normalize, at least to a degree, discussion about wage. That's something that I do, and I get a lot of flack about it. I'll talk with anyone about my wage or theirs. I'll ask anyone on the street, oh, this is what you do. What do you make? And apparently that's very taboo. That's not the way I see it, and I don't think that's the way that any of us should see it. But in the workplace, absolutely, it can create feelings of inequality, and sometimes that inequality is justified. I'm not saying that in every case it is, especially when the inequality is based off of something like gender or race or sexual orientation. None of that's called for, none of that's right or fair. But at the same time, productivity deserves to be a sort of discriminating factor in regards to compensation.
So kind of just piggybacking off of Ben and Tyler, I am personally adamant about transparency of salaries, especially in a corporate workplace, because it allows people to know what you're paid. Public or like government jobs, we know what their salaries are. It's public, and so for instance, I know someone who was making less than men who were just starting out, and her experience was higher, and she was being paid less. And until she pointed it out to her boss, it didn't get fixed. It's in the process of getting fixed. And so in that, I think we need to be transparent. But the other part of it, the other factor for me is I want real numbers. I hear both sides give different percentages. And so within that, there's a confusion of what the real problem looks like. So I heard 70 cents to a dollar. Well, I've also heard 93 cents to the dollar if you look at the 10% highest paid jobs between men and women. So I need to know what are the real numbers. And secondly, I believe in equal opportunity, but I don't think equal outcome is fair. I don't think it's possible for the demand that 50% of CEOs need to be women. I don't think that's going to happen. It's like me demanding 50% of nurses be men, because that's overly represented by women, and it's by a choice. And so within that, I think we do run into trouble of understanding what the depth of the problem and what it really looks like, so that we can solve it. And then the other factor is different salaries at different experience levels. If the data is only looking at the insert job title, and the average male makes this amount, but the average woman or female makes this amount, if pays are through a scale system, say that you make 48,000 to 75,000, and say that the average females, what if there's a lesser representation of females in that profession? So look at the STEMs, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, which there are. And now you're comparing it to females in that field. The data for the men would be heavily skewed to make the females' representation smaller. And I don't think that's helping us understand how deep the problem is. And it makes us react emotionally. And I want to fight for women to be dollar for dollar fair, for sure. But the capitalistic mindset in me says, if I own a business and I only have to pay 70 cents for an employee, the dollar employee is out. I'm only hiring for 77 cents because I make more profit as the owner. So a lot of businesses will reflect that there'll be more women hired than men. And so, but when you add choice for job opportunities, women are getting to choose what jobs they want. A majority of women that I know, I personally will pick emotional security and emotional stability in a job than pay. I know women that will say, I will take less pay to be happy where I am. And there are men out there that say, I will take a crappy job because it pays more. So what do you do? Like, why? And so in that, I really wrestle with, should we take choice away from the question? Should women have the opportunity to choose the jobs they want? Or should we demand a 50% representation on all fields?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Do we keep it at something where it's like 50-50 across the board? We have 50% male nurses, 50% female nurses, and field that's historically have mostly been a female-dominated field is nurses. But in today's day and age, you see a lot more male nurses than what you used to. Same as you see a lot more male teachers than what you used to. But yet you see a lot more females in blue-collar industrial jobs than what you used to. So I think, in a way, I don't think the government would have to legislate something where it's 50-50. It kind of just naturally is balancing it out. And the women's suffrage movements, especially the second and third wave, have made so many strides with pay, reducing the pay gap between the genders. So when you talk about these two people working in the same company, doing the same role, it's stated that the man makes more than the women. There's so many factors in play to say it's simply just because of gender. You don't know the experience level between the two. You don't know maybe seniority, things like that, location. If I'm a teacher in one place and she's a teacher in another place, two different school districts, well, maybe this school district pays a little bit more. So there's so many different factors that go into it rather than just saying men naturally get paid more than women. Well, gender is one of many factors that could fall into that. And I wouldn't automatically point to gender, but you think of one of the biggest pay disputes that right now, and that's with the national women's soccer team. They've actually gone all the way to court to say, hey, we deserve to be paid as much as men. Look at the difference in how we're paid. But when you really investigate that issue, you see two different collective bargaining agreements. You see two different ways in which they're marketed. You see two different ticket sales between the two. All these things make up the decision of salary. So it's not simply, well, we just need to get paid the same across the board. Well, then you could do that, but is it really equal then? If male team is bringing in more ticket sales than women's team, which don't bring in that many ticket sales, although they're more successful, if they negotiate two different collective bargaining agreements and you just want to make it 50-50 across the board, then, what's the point of all that then? So there's so many different variables and factors that play into it to really say there is a significant pay gap like there was 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 60 years ago. Too many factors at play.
What do you wish women understood about men? What do men need to do to better understand women?
Something I wish women knew about men. We have the ability to think about nothing. I think women sometimes really struggle with that. Like, what are you thinking about? Nothing. No, that's not possible. The best way that I've explained to college students and youths about understanding women a little bit more is kind of like look at a computer screen with multiple tabs open at the same time. Is kind of like a women's mind of like being able to think about multiple and multitask so many levels. And that pop-ups sometimes are like emotional pop-ups. They don't know when it's going to happen and it just happens. So for me, what I would want to know about women is like when that happens, when you have an emotional pop-up, how can we help as men? Because sometimes, like for me, when I listen to something that my fiance says, I want to fix the problem, but sometimes just listening is fixing it, and I can't tell the difference between that. And so for women to tell us before they start, this is a listen problem, not a fix problem, I think would help more. Is that possible?
Just to add a little bit to it, like I specifically, I don't know if every dude's like this, but this is again a generalization. I know a lot of guys that can. I know a lot of guys that can do a lot of things at once, but like, I can think about nothing, like you said, absolutely nothing, or I can think about one thing extremely well. It's like exponential diminishing return when it comes to adding like 2 things, 3 things, 4 things. It's like I can't do it, but I like that.
If I may steal a quote from Winnie the Pooh, nothing always leads to the very best something. So, and my wife asks me that all the time. Chris, what are you thinking about? Oh, nothing really. And she just gets this confused look on her face. No, really, there's nothing going on in my mind, but there will be something. Something's going to come from it. When I think, okay, what do I wish women would understand about men? That we're logical creatures. We think logically about everything. Our job is to fix the problem. We will talk through it logically, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Here's the conclusion. And that's not what women need. And I've found that out the hard way. It's not what women need. And something that we as men need to understand is women need the emotional connection. It's not simply, I'm going to sit next to you and watch a movie, but I'm going to spend time glancing at my phone or reading this magazine. No, it's you need that intimacy. You need that emotional connection. I need to put my phone down. I need to put my book down. I need to turn my attention to you and see you eye to eye. If you think of, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Avatar with the blue and green creature thingies. One thing they talk about is, I see you. It's a deeper more than, I visually see you, but I understand you. I have that connection with you. And I think that's what women need the most, is knowing that we have that connection with them. And that means disconnecting from what we're doing at the moment and just turning our full attention to them and connecting with them. And that's something that as guys we struggle with because we're able to multitask more than women are. But it's something that can be worked on. I've been working on it myself, is being able to cut distractions out when she needs my attention and just give her my attention. And then not try and logically fix her problem, but just listen to her problem.